Hey, how's it going, everybody? Going to go over some of the information installing our Bulldog hidden winch plate, as well as the Harbor Freight Badlands 12,000 pound winch with the synthetic line. I'm going to be installing it on my 2020 Toyota Tacoma. I looked around a little bit, didn't see very many detailed installation videos, so I figured I would try and make one that was a little bit more detailed. As you can see with the truck behind me here, I do have the hidden light bar, the stealth bar. So hoping that that doesn't interfere, I may have to relocate that light bar. We'll see more when we get in there. I'll go over some of the details of the items that come with the winch and the hidden winch mount, and then we'll get into trying to take apart the bumper, what needs to come off, and kind of how to access those things, and then go from there. All right, so in the box with the Apex Badlands 12,000 pound winch, you get the winch itself, you get some mounting hardware, you get the connections with some covers, you get the battery disconnect to disable the battery power when not in use, some mounting hardware if you wish to relocate the controls. You get your winch end hook, the fair lead, as well as a cover for the end of your line and storage. And the wireless remote that does also come with a cable should the batteries die on you and you need to connect it, and then some other wiring also to connect to your battery. It will also come with the base plate there to help connect and install it there on whatever mount you choose. Now, the mount that I went with was the Bulldog off-road hidden winch mount. You can see it here. It does come with the mount itself as well as the fair lead front. And I got this one on etrailers.com. It was $369 plus shipping and tax. I think it worked out to be right around $400. That was at the time of filming this video, which is currently February 19th, so about a week or so before that. Let's get started on the truck. All right, so first thing we're going to do is we're going to take the grill off. Grill on these trucks is extremely simple to take off. You have the two 10mm bolts here, and then there are also two clips down here. These clips are really simple. If you can get a nail under them, you can just pop them up. If not, you can use a little flathead screwdriver, and basically they just pop up, and then you just grab that second piece there. They pull straight out. Put these in a safe place, don't lose them. I like to use, like, sometimes you'll find the little holes there in the cross member. Great place to keep them if you can remember where they're at. So once those are out, we'll take these electrical clips out here. So there's one here, one here. These ones, usually you can just kind of squeeze them, push down a little bit, and that'll pop out. Same thing with this one. You can squeeze it down through. Usually you don't even really need tools for it. If you can kind of get a nail behind it, anything like that, just kind of pop those through. It looks like this one I may need to get a screwdriver for. Maybe I can get to it the other side here. There we go. Just pop that down and out. So we'll get these couple of screws out, and then I'll show you how easy the grill is to come off. All right, so once you take these two 10mm bolts out here, the grill is real simple. You simply lift up on these and it kind of pulls forward. Grab it from the sides here and just kind of wiggle it, pull it straight out. This will get you access to your one clip down here. And once you unplug that, you're free to remove it. Now, my truck is the SR model. If you have some of the other models, you may have one more clip to unscrew, unclip, and to remove other sensors and such there. All right, now that the grill's out, we can see that we have several clips that we need to take off. These are the same as the other ones. Simply get your screwdriver under there, pop these out, take the other piece out. Probably a good idea at this point to get a trash bag, Ziploc bag, or something to store these in, a little parts bin or something. But we're gonna remove this clip here, these clips across the front. Again, same clip on the other side. We're going to come around the side here, and we're going to remove these clips here and here, and then we're also going to take loose the other pieces on the inside of the fender skirt here in order to make sure that we have full access to everything. There's a couple little screws under here to gain access to get the rest of this bumper off. All right, so after you remove this screw here and then this pin here, this one is just a quarter turn, meaning you turn it 90 degrees and then it'll pop right out. There's a clip right down here that is just basically a little plastic clip, and you just kind of bend it out a little bit and it'll release that. Reach your hand right around in here and this will kind of pop off of that side of the screw. I can get it to pop off there. See how that kind of comes out of there right there. Once that does that, if you just give this kind of a firm pull, it'll pull away from your fender, and then that's going to release your bumper. So make sure that you're ready for that bumper to come all the way off. Otherwise, if you're not ready or somebody's not supporting it, it's just going to flop on the ground in front of you, scratch all your stuff up. So make sure you pay attention to that. All right, once your bumper's off, this is basically what you're going to be looking at. For me, it was easier to undo the one screw that held the fog lights in rather than undo all the wiring. My fog lights are aftermarket, so there was some additional wiring. Yours may be easier to just unplug. Now you can see the light bar I discussed previously. That 100% is going to have to come out, and then I'll have to see if there's room for it after the winch is in. So next thing we're going to do is, I know that this top cross brace has to come out, so I'm going to go ahead and take the cross brace out. I'm going to take the light out, and then the actual aluminum bumper will come out, and all of that basically is going to be these 3 14mm screws. I don't know if you can see back in there if it's going to focus, but those 3 14mm screws right there is 1, 2, 3, way out of focus here. 1, 2, 3 there, and then all this should come out. We'll get our winch plate up there, see how it's going to mount, see what we need to do. So 3 on that side, 3 on this side. There are the 2 here, 2 up top here. We'll have to undo this wiring clip from the bottom, and then these 2 over here. There is also down under here, looks like 3 rivets that we may have to undo. May just be able to undo the single clip over here as the support comes through. We'll have to see what we need to do there. All right, so one thing I just ran into to take note of while you're taking everything else apart is this little tie down, toe point, whatever you want to call it here. There's 2 bolts that hold that on. This has to come off. Also, this bolt here and this bolt here need to come off in order to put the winch mount on. Now, these 2 bolts here on this side and the other side will go back in. I don't see that this one is going to be able to go back in, but we'll get to that as soon as we get the plate on. All right, so something I just came across, as you can see, we put the winch plate up here. Sits nice in there. The holes here, slotted holes, if you can see them. They line up really well. As you can see though, we're all the way at the bottom of these holes here. So there's no room to go any further up. But when we come down to those lower ones we were talking about, see that gap? Now you can see that metal is obviously bent down a little bit, and it'll probably come up just a little bit as we tighten that bolt down, but I don't necessarily like that gap there. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to see if I've got some big fender washers to kind of take up that gap on this side. Now on this side, that gap might allow us to put that toe point, tie down point, whatever you want to call it, back on and allow that steel to fit under there and take up that gap as well. It appears that there's plenty of threads on here to hold it in place there and hold it securely, so I'm not worried about that, but I don't want it to just have floating open space in there. I'd at least like it to be sandwiched on some washers or that toe bracket. I wanted to stop a minute here and share this trick that I learned a few years back. If you got to drill into a hole, you know, a washer, make a hole larger, something of that nature, a lot of people try and clamp it in a vice grips, you know, whatever. That's a surefire way to try and get yourself injured. Easiest thing you can do is grab a couple screws and some washers and clamp it down to a board like this. You'll drill straight down into the board. It won't rock and twist and do all that. And then I prefer to use these step bits. You can pick them up fairly cheap, and then you can kind of get whatever size you need till you open it up to that diameter that you need. Now these are going to go in that gap that we were talking about a minute ago to kind of take up the slack there. What I ended up doing here, so these two bolts are the bolts that came out of the ends of the pieces there, where the winch mount is going to end up being bolted back into the subframe there. These two bolts are the bolts that came out of this tow hook tie down point that actually cannot go back in. It interferes with the winch mount, so we're just going to leave it out. But what I wanted to show you is if you look at these bolts, you can see here that this one has a little bit of a starter thread on it, and then it's got some threads. These bolts, while they look like they would be the same size as far as overall threads, they're not. You can see the threads actually start down here, and this is just a slight bit narrower. So we're going to use these bolts, and we're going to get that extra probably 3/8 of an inch of thread there to be holding a little bit better, and then we'll just put these in the parts bin with that tie down mount, and it'll hold everything together a little bit better. So we'll end up putting this bolt here up through the winch plate. So we'll go through the winch plate and then through our two washers here into the subframe. All right, so a little update here. We originally removed this little crossbar to make clearance for the control box, and then I ran into some other issues with the control box positioning, and I didn't really like having to remove this crossbar, and then we were going to have to end up cutting this brace that goes all the way up. Has your I believe that's a transmission cooler sitting on it that goes all the way up and bolts into the hood latch. Didn't really like that aspect of it, so I was looking in the instructions and it said that you can actually remove the control box from the top of the winch itself. So in order to do that, there's two screws that you have to take out of the top in this little compartment here. It says they're a metric 4. They're not. They're actually a T20 Torx, if you can see that there. And then once those two screws are out, this cover comes loose. You have to take off there's 6 bolts, nuts, that hold these on with some other little copper brackets that come down. Those are 1/2 inch nuts. You just take all 6 of those loose, and then the bolts that go through here, I don't remember what it says they are. It says they're a metric something or other there, but they're actually a T30 Torx. So instead what we're going to do is there is a relocation bracket, comes with the kit, comes with everything here. So these 4 little, let's see if we can get this to focus here. So these 4 little Torx here, they're again going to be the T30. These replace these ones in the top of the winch for here, so you protect your threads and kind of keep it looking neat. They actually call them decorative bolts. And then these two that you'll see with the thread locker, these two actually go on top of the winch. There is a control box, a little box that protects your cords when you come out of there. So those two are going to screw down in this spot here, and those will lock this box onto the winch. And then this cover, when the cover goes on, it's going to be these three here. You'll also see that there's 4 bolts here. These are going to go in these 4 holes to mount this plate to wherever you're going to relocate it to. And then these 4 holes here is what mount this relocation plate to the control box, and those are held on with these. These are a 5/32 Allen. If we can get that to focus here. So 5/32 Allen, and then the nuts on the back side of them are an 8mm. Now these screws are way too long. I'll probably end up cutting them down. I'll wait until it's all mounted nice and in there flush, and then I'll go ahead and cut them off. But 2 things I wanted to note. If you look at the back of this, I'm not sure if the video you'll be able to tell, but one of these tabs actually sits a little different than the other. And what that's for is when you flip this over and you have the wiring coming out, you'll be able to tell when you set it down in here and you get it all lined up. One of them will line up nice where everything looks fairly well centered, and there's a bigger gap for the clearance on these wires. If you spin it the wrong way around, you'll notice that it's offset all the way up against this side, and it doesn't sit about the same. So that's how I notice it, is when it wasn't centered. So you'll notice that you have that nice centered look here between the edges. So I think as far as this bracket is concerned, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it and I'm going to put a couple of brackets, just a couple pieces of flat steel between this lower part of the front end here up to the top, and then I'll put a couple of riv nuts in, and I'm just going to mount it right here to where when the hood's open it's still accessible. So we'll get all that taken care of, and then I'll get you updated. Here's the solution that I came up with for relocating the control box for the winch. I went down to Home Depot. I got a piece of this 1" by 48" 3/16 thick, just flat steel. Merely held it up, sorry about the glare there, held it up against this, made sure that it was basically straight. Obviously this isn't, I'm just holding it up there. Drilled a pilot hole where I thought it would be, where I thought it would need to be, same on the lower end. And then I use a center punch. For those of you that aren't familiar, it's spring loaded. As you push down on it, it will actually leave a punch mark, and it gives a place for your drill bit to start. So I used that, and I went through my pilot hole. Let's see if I can block that glare there. Went through my pilot hole, and it'll focus there. There's my center punch mark here, and down here, center punch mark there. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to drill some holes in here, and I'm going to use riv nuts. If you're unfamiliar with what a riv nut is, it is basically a piece that you use a tool. It's one of these. So I'll drill a hole up here. I'll insert this in here. There's a tool that actually smashes this part against it, and then it leaves threads. It'll be almost like this, except for this little lip will be on the outside, but that way I can bolt and unbolt without having threads or anything exposed here on the outside. It'll look clean, more like factory. So I'm gonna get all that done. I'm gonna get these pieces painted, get the other one drilled, marked, inserted, and then we'll catch back up. So one thing to mention whenever you're drilling through something like this is your radiator behind here. I hope you know that if you're working on your own vehicle, but this is your radiator. Actually, this is your AC condenser. The radiator sits behind that. But if we look down on here, we can see that drill bit will go all the way through. So you want to be real careful when you get into this and you're drilling. You want to make sure that you're not putting a ton of pressure, because you'll go straight through into the back. It's also a really good idea to just, before you start drilling, reach your hand back there, make sure there's nothing back there, make sure there's nothing back here. Sometimes there's, you know, these little AC lines or maybe even electrical that's back there. So before you drill, reach back there, just make sure you're not going to drill in anything. If you get real nervous about it and you're worried about punching through, take a little block of wood or something and stick behind there, and that way you'll hit that wood and it won't go through. You may bend a couple of fins on the condenser there, but at least you won't drill into it and ruin it, because that's really expensive to repair if you do go through it and lose all of your AC refrigerant. All right, so as I was saying before, you can use a riv nut tool. You can get these on Amazon. I think they're like 30 bucks. They come with a bunch of riv nuts. The way that you operate it, open it all the way up. You can see that it extends this piece out. Take your riv nut, thread it on there. Try not to cross thread it. Thread it all the way down on there. And then you're just going to insert it into the hole. Make sure it's in there nice and tight. Squeeze the handles together until you feel it get tight. And then once it gets tight, you can relieve the pressure. There's a knob on the back. Unscrew it. And now you've got a nice threaded point that looks clean to install hardware into over and over again instead of rivets or anything else. So as we can see, as I started putting this nut in, I don't know if you can tell, there's actually a little bend in this. It doesn't sit at on the same plane basically. So I'm gonna take a Sharpie, I'm gonna put a little mark across the back of this, and I'm gonna put this in a vise down here, and I'm just gonna bend it a little bit and give that maybe a 10 degree, 15 degree bend right there, and allow that to sit flat to where this piece, the main piece that we're concerned about, where that control box is going to mount, will be flat. And that's really all we're concerned about, is have nice solid mounting points. Once this is all painted and I'm ready for final assembly, I'll put a little bit of blue Loctite on each of these bolts. There'll be another set over here, and that way it'll all hold nice and tight together. We won't have to worry about it rattling loose out on the trail. All right, so we have the one side basically complete and ready for paint. This side, the top one, is all done. And in the bottom here, we ran into a little bit of an issue where we have this hole that isn't gonna line up. So what I did is I just cut a little piece, and it's basically the same size as that channel you can see. So when this goes to tighten, it's gonna hit those sides like this, and it's not gonna allow that piece to spin. And that's going to allow us to get it nice and tight and still have good connection there. And then as you can see, it's plenty big enough that it's not going to pull through. It'll be good. It'll cover that hole. So I'll just reach in behind, hold that there, put it in. So this piece is ready for paint then. I was going to drill and tap this to accept the same screw. I did not have the tap that was that metric 6x1.0. So instead I just went ahead and put the riv nut in it. But this will give you an idea on the back side of those riv nuts, kind of how they sandwich in there and they hold. Obviously this is a pretty thick piece and it still holds really well. So simple solution. The tool is basically already paid for itself in mounting solutions. So now I got to drill that hole out, get it all ready to go. I'll paint these two pieces and this third piece, and then I'm running out of daylight today, so I'll probably let those sit overnight and maybe see what I can do about getting some stuff mounted up, and then we'll finish it up tomorrow. One quick clarification. If you remember previously, I was talking about how these bolts were super long and I was just going to cut them off. I'm glad I didn't already cut them off, because I was wrong. Those bolts do not go for that. Those bolts are actually for this switch, and they go through, once you get it wired up, they actually go through and bolt that all together and seal it. The short Torx bolts, those short T30 Torx, that come in the packaging are the ones that'll go in the top here to cover up your holes that we were talking about previously. They do have lock washers. So the long ones that you take out of it will be the ones that go with this and sandwich that together with the lock washer and the nut. And then the short ones will go in to protect your threads here. And then the longer Allen bolts with the nylock washers are the ones that go on here. So wanted to make sure I clarify that. I went ahead and picked up these bolts. This is the metric 6 by 1.0 by 20 millimeter, and these are the bolts that I'm using on the flat pieces that I've mounted to the truck with the riv nuts to mount the control box onto. And then obviously the bolts that'll mount this adapter plate for the control box onto the truck are the ones that are right there that come with the flat washers, the lock washers, and the nuts. So I'll show you when it's all together. It'll hopefully make more sense. All right, good morning. We're out here day 2 installing our Harbor Freight Badland winch. That is the Apex 12,000 pound model here. And we are installing it on my 2020 Toyota Tacoma. I have the winch plate installed. This is for the hidden winch mount, remember. One thing I wanted to show you as we got our brackets that we fabbed up yesterday, you'll notice this one has a notch in it right here. That was done intentionally. I did have a Sharpie mark on this. You can probably see from some of the other images and stuff from earlier in the video that I had it marked as left. So I put a notch in it before I painted it to make sure I could distinguish between left and right. Whenever you're doing custom stuff, you know, put a little file mark, put a little grind mark, something that you can distinguish if the parts are similar. And that way you can tell them apart after they're painted and make sure everything lines back up good. So one thing I did notice when I was looking at everything here towards the end of the day yesterday is with this plate that goes down for the fair lead, it's got to come down and it sits kind of outside, but where it mounts up on the plate, it actually interferes here. So you can see right there, as that hits, we still have basically the thickness of that plate sitting above it. So rather than putting a spacer under the winch, I think I'm just going to take my grinder and I'm just going to take the thickness off here and basically make this about half as thick until it clearances under there. That way, theoretically, this shouldn't have a whole lot of tension on it. This is just the guide for the fair lead to go through and bolt through. So it'll have some tension on it, but it's not, that's not where the main weight, the main tension is when you're operating the winch. That's going to be on these bolts here. So I want these secured as best as possible onto the winch plate. So that's where I'm going to keep these ones flat down. I'm not going to put a spacer there. I'll instead cut some off of this to make this fit better. And I'll show you as that all comes together. So I'm going to go ahead and set up the time lapse, and I'm going to assemble all this, get the control box mounted in there. I'll get the wires ran because I do have to run those wires back down onto here and connect them back into the pieces. One thing I did mention yesterday, when you do remove the control box from the top of here and relocate it, there are these brass studs that you install on, and they're to lift these connections up a little bit, and that is when the wires come through, they're not bending down and creating unneeded tension on them, so the wires can come straight in and lock in there. So I'll show you when that's all together. All right, so now maybe you get a little better idea of what I was talking about. So we got the straps in here, we've got it mounted, everything tightened down, control box relocated here. Now the wires that run from the control box back over to the winch are all color coded. So you can see black, red, yellow. So what I did is I've taken the excess wire and spooled it up here just in case there's ever an issue. If you ever need some extra length of wire, it's all right there. Color coded it. The zip tie is the same. One thing that I like to do, and you can see if I can get it to focus in back here, is I like to keep stuff clean. The less movement and vibration. Now these aren't super tight, you can move them around, it's not pinching on anything. But if you can keep stuff nice and clean like that and reduce that friction and bouncing around, it's going to save these ends on the terminals. Did the same thing up here, might be able to focus a little bit better. And what that's going to do is that's going to keep these wires nice and flat, not allow them to bounce and twist, and it'll start breaking connections in here if there's a bunch of vibration going around. And I'll end up zip tying all these together once it's final in. It's still not secured down. But that way, once the grille's on and the hood's open, I still be able to reach down in here, pop open my cover, access my cord if I need to run it with cord, and access my power switch right from the top. So that should give me good access. I'll also be able to reach down in here and reach into my lever for the free spool and locked in. All right, so what I did is I put a couple bolts in. I put one in the front here, one in the back corner, just to kind of make sure that this is down a little bit. I've got a pair of calipers here. If you don't have a pair, you don't need a very expensive pair. I'm sure you can use a block of wood or a tape measure or whatever, but I just measured that distance there. And so it came up at about 505 thousandths, whatever. So a little over ½ inch. So I just went down to 450 thousandths, just made it a little bit shorter. And then on calipers, there's a screw on the top here. If you snug this screw down, it doesn't want to move. It kind of locks it in. Now it's not a hard lock, but it'll definitely keep it in place for the most part. What that allows you to do is then when I have my plate, you can actually put it here up against this edge, and you can just use it to run a scribe line. And you can see that scribe line. Now it's not very deep, you don't want to push real hard, you don't want to damage your calipers or anything. You just need to put a scribe line in the powder coat so that when I get in here and I cut this, I can figure out, you know, kind of where to go down to. That weld isn't very nice on that side, but it's stuck together, so that's all that matters. So I'll go ahead and cut this down. I think I'm just going to basically cut it right here, and I'll just kind of continue this angle down. It doesn't need to go down in there very far. We'll see if that fits up, and then I'll just touch up paint the raw metal parts. All right, so I went ahead and cut those brackets off, as you can see, and then I just touch up painted it. You can see the cutoff wheel went a little deep, but it's fine. So this is all in here. I had to go to Home Depot again and get some 3/8 carriage bolts. I used carriage bolts since we were low on clearance, and basically they just, I don't know if you don't know what carriage bolts are, there's a square piece in the bottom that kind of locks it in to where the top of the bolt won't turn. And then I just got some fender washers, lock washers, and then some nuts, and I'll go ahead and Loctite those. This side was fine. Over on the driver's side, the hole was a little tight, so I took the fender washer to the grinder and cut it flat to where I could still get it in there. So the winch is loosely in, the fair lead mount is loosely in. This can slide back and forth a little bit. The winch can slide back and forth. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna go ahead and set the bumper back up on here to where I can see where that hole needs to be cut for the fair lead to go through, and then get an idea of where that needs to be adjusted. And then once that's adjusted, I can snug everything down, Loctite it in place, cut the bumper, and then we can put the bumper fitment back in and start running our wiring. There's a pretty large gap in there between the fair lead. I mean, I can fit almost 2 fingers in there, definitely one, between the fair lead mount and the front of the bumper here. And it's the bottom part of the mount. Let's see if I can get you in there. No. Sorry, that ain't gonna focus. But it's basically hitting right across here. So we can't come forward anymore with the mount. So what I'm gonna do instead is I've basically traced the front of the fair lead on here, and I'm just gonna start cutting it and get it. I'll probably stay like a 1/2 inch in all the way around until I can start getting into these bolt holes on either side to where I can figure out exactly where those are gonna sit. And then once I can, I'll snug the bolts into it, and then I can really trace it and figure out exactly where I need to go. And basically this whole thing is gonna be recessed into this front plastic bumper cover, and it'll sit flat against the other mount. And then I can trim it out and do whatever I need to do to make it look good. So I'm gonna do all that, and then we'll come back. Finally got everything cut out for the fair lead mount. As you can see, there's quite a bit of distance all the way around it. That was done intentionally. I'm gonna use some of this edge trim here. It's this stuff, truck and SUV edge trim. It's meant for like doors, so you don't door ding, but it works really good around raw edges like that. And that way it's got a nice finished look and should help kind of seal it in. So I'm gonna go ahead and mold that all around there, and then we'll get the rest of everything buttoned up with the wiring down below, and then I can put the bumper back on for the last time, and then we can work on everything up top. All right, so we finally got all the wiring buttoned up. Went ahead and mounted the fair lead mount here. The hole in the bumper with the trim piece around it actually slides right over it almost perfectly. I'll show you that in a little bit. All this wiring is secured. There is this little wire that runs from the control box down, and it attaches to the same ground point. Put a little sheeting over this where it passes by some sharp metal here. Ran it just along the frame here, and then did another piece of sheeting here where it passes over. This edge back here is kind of sharp. So what I did is I pulled it around this side and then went ahead and put a zip tie on it to hold it over on this side instead of getting on that sharp edge over there. So that should secure it for a while there. The power wire I just ran up and then behind itself up underneath of this channel here. There's 7 little pop clips that take this top trim piece off. And once that's off, you can actually access under here. And then I just put a couple of zip ties in and ran it along here. And then straight down, just kind of meshed it in, ran a couple zip ties, ground cable, looped the excess in, brought it up and around. The ground cable I actually brought in and was able to put it in between here, so it pinches it tight here, makes solid contact all along here. Didn't interfere with the overall contact of the terminal, nice and tight. Power cable, brought it up into the side of the switch here, and then out the other side over here. Made a small little loop and then just fed it in over on the side of the positive terminal here, straight to the battery. I did have to trim a small piece out of the side of the cover here, but it all still fits nicely. All right, now that we've talked about all the wiring, we can show her here real quick. So this is a nice little interrupter switch. It makes sure that there's no power going to the winch at any point in time, kills it straight from the battery, interrupts it here when in the off position. So in order to use your winch, you have to turn it on here. And then if you're going to be using it wired, then you would pop this cap open and plug your wire in. If you're going to be using it wireless, then you just flip this switch here, and that provides power to the wireless. I'm guessing it's probably like a Bluetooth or something of that nature. One of the things that's nice about the Badlands one is the wireless controller, and to put it in wireless mode, you just hold it down for a couple of seconds. The light will illuminate showing it is on, and then you can simply use it and it'll run out. Now obviously you should have tension under that, so I'm not going to put it any further. But when you're ready to turn the remote off, hold it down for 2 seconds, the light will go out and it's off. You can set it up somewhere, nice little magnetic feature, keep it out of the way until you're ready to put it away. I'm going to go ahead and get the bumper back on, get everything buttoned up, and then I will show you the finished product. All right, so here it is all put back together. You can see once we did the little trim around it, that large opening tightened right up, made everything look nice and tight. We've got our hook on there now. It's nice and secure. You can just kind of see it behind there. I did lose my light bar behind there. I think I'm gonna see if I can't maybe move it up into here. I really like that light bar on the front. But with everything put back together, you can see that that control box is nice and accessible right down in here. You can just pop your cover off. You can reach it, you know, from either side of this little bracket here. So nice and accessible, clean. You don't have to buy the aftermarket bumpers. You don't have to spend all that kind of money. It was, I would say, when all was said and done, I spent probably a little over $1,000 with hardware, the winch, the plate, and everything else. So something to consider. It did also take me roughly 2 full days to do it. I was also videoing, and I did have to fabricate those brackets and wait for the paint to dry. If you weren't really worried about any of that and you weren't videoing and everything else, you could probably get it done in one long day. So hope you liked it. Feel free to like, share, comment, leave me your comments, thoughts if you like it, if you think I could have done something different, or any suggestions on where to relocate that light bar to. Thank you.